want to make art. And I want to make trouble.
Today, we've moved beyond the age of the anti-hero to center someone even worse, the sympathetic villain.
Playing fair is a joke invented by rich people to keep the rest of us poor.
The anti-hero story typically makes us wonder where its murky or mixed-up hero will end up on the good versus evil spectrum. We've also discussed the anti-hero 2.0 narrative, which doesn't expect its character to improve and encourages more distance and moral judgment.
I'm not gonna change!
But a story that empathizes with a straight-up villain asks us to identify with a person we know clearly is wrong without offering any excuses or ambiguities.
I thought it was gonna bother me, but it really hasn't.
Increasingly, we're seeing stories with a villain protagonist who might not be contrasted with any likable featured hero. The story might try to get us on side by making the villain a victim.
He did this to me so he would be king.
Or a lesser evil who faces off against someone worse.
Who are you?
A dangerous man.
It says that on your business card.
You should be scared right now.
Or they might still face off against a hero, but be what's called an anti-villain, the flip side of the anti-hero, a villain with heroic tendencies.
It's about 2 billion people all over the world that looks like us, but their lives are a lot harder.
A story about a sympathetic villain is a bold experiment, but it might not always work, especially if it goes to such extremes to make them sympathetic that they're no longer really a villain. Or if it mixes up their villainy with weird social cues that lead to the story sending a confused message.
Does it sting more because I'm a woman?
Yet, at its best, the sympathetic villain story is a means for articulating a fascinating critique of society and its mores. It can make us see ourselves in the villain and the villainy in ourselves.
If anything in this life is certain, if history's taught us anything, it says you can kill anyone.
If you're new here, be sure to subscribe and click the bell to get notified about all our new videos.
Exciting news, we have a new episode of Take Two airing on Netflix Film Club YouTube channel.
We're talking about Thunder Force.
It stars two of our favorite actresses, Melissa McCarthy and Octavia Spencer, as a crime-fighting superhero duo.
Click the link in our description below to watch the Take Two on which superpower is better, super strength or invisibility.
And let us know what superpower you would want. Check it out
on the Netflix Film Club YouTube channel.
We've come up with a set of criteria for when the sympathetic villain story works best, and when it doesn't. Number 1, actually let them be a villain.
You broke my legs!
Oh, boo-hoo. What? If the writing can't decide whether this person is a villain or an anti-hero or a victim, it can end up muddying the waters and making us wonder why this story exists. But while preserving this villainy, the writing should also, number 2, make us empathize or understand.
The rich and the powerful, they do whatever they want. Guys like us, like you and me, they don't care about us.
That doesn't require making the character likable, and it's often best if it's clear that they're wrong, but we do need to participate in why they make the choices they do.
He took and took from me until I no longer existed. That's murder.
Finally, this type of story should, number 3, use this person's villainy to articulate a clear theme or message. The whole point of putting a spotlight on a more complex or compelling villain is to reveal something incisive about the darkness in human existence and society.
Y'all gonna have to come up off some serious dough for this, all right?
I will make sure you're properly compensated.
So the story needs to be intentional about what philosophy its villain and the characters they're pitted against represent.
We're gonna fight cabin some socialists.
There are several different ways that stories convince us to side with the villains, with different emotional results. One increasingly popular approach is to make them the protagonist.
They say, if you want to tell a story right, you gotta start at the beginning.
In recent years, a number of villain protagonist narratives have given us an origin story for, or centered, a known villain character who was previously more two-dimensionally evil.
From the very beginning, I realized I saw the world differently than everyone else. That didn't sit well with some people.
We can see an early example of this trend in the 2003 musical Wicked, based on the 1995 novel, which considers if the ultimate cardboard villain, whose actual name is the Wicked Witch of the West, might have a different point of view about what happened in the Wizard of Oz.
Kill my sister.
The sympathetic villain protagonist gets a chance to tell their side of the story.
It was Maleficent's love which broke that very same curse. But that detail was somehow mysteriously forgotten.
Some of the most influential streaming hits of the 2010s, like House of Cards, Game of Thrones, and Succession, all hooked audiences on the drama of centering enjoyably bad villains who never pretended to be otherwise.
I choose violence.
To be sympathetic, the villain doesn't have to be a person we like in real life. Cambridge Dictionary defines a character being sympathetic as described or shown in such a way that you are able to understand the character's feelings, with the result that you like them.
She pretended to love me. All I ever wanted from Beck was to be seen, really seen, and accepted.
And to an extent, just the act of making a villain the protagonist at the center of a story structure is enough to make you connect to them. But a second technique a number of these stories use to elicit greater feeling is to make them a victim. A victimized villain story banks on the fact that we often feel for people who've been hurt.
The world took everything away from me. Everything I ever loved.
And today's victimized villain plots often channel a broader pattern of how our society cruelly mistreats people of a certain class, race, or gender to trigger our sense of injustice. Maleficent, Birds of Prey, and Gone Girl explain the villainy of their female protagonists and how they've been done wrong by men.
Nick Dunn took my pride and my dignity and my hope and my money.
Joker and Spider-Man Homecoming feature villains who are formed by class inequality.
They don't give a shit about people like you, Arthur.
In Black Panther, Eric Killmonger's quarrel with the movie's hero is rooted in justified outrage over the unfairness of having lost his father, as well as having grown up as a black man in a racist society.
These items aren't for sale.
How do you think your ancestors got these? You think they paid a fair price? Or did they take it like they took everything else?
Killmonger is perhaps one of our time's best examples of the anti-villain, who operates in the same space as a traditional villain against a hero protagonist.
Burn it all!
But whom the movie makes us feel for and understand.
So ain't all people your people?
In their mind, the victimized villain feels their morally unscrupulous behavior is justified because of what they've been through. It's also true that a lot of people who do bad things have been victims of traumas or abuse, and ultimately these stories emphasize that villainy is a cycle, often perpetuated from the top down. Still, if the victim track goes too far in fully humanizing characters or blaming their behavior on external causes, it risks making the sympathetic villain not a villain at all.
No true love.
Sometimes stories are more interesting and coherent if they don't over-justify or mitigate this character's evil, but really own the badness.
The reason why we loved all these villains when we were kids was because they were bad, not in spite of it.
Thus, rather than softening their villains' edges, some of the most effective sympathetic villain stories use a third technique. They trick us into villainy. Here, the villain protagonist starts out as appealing, charismatic, or heroic in order to get us on side, and the story cons us into continuing to root for the villain even as they become more and more overtly evil. Perhaps the best example of this would be Michael Corleone in The Godfather. He's presented to us as an idealist, the decorated soldier who's not like his mafia family.
That's my family, Kay. It's not me.
When he does eventually turn, it's under pressure to defend his family. As the trilogy goes on and Michael becomes a ruthless, cold-blooded boss, he alienates, hurts, and even murders members of that very family.
Only don't tell me you're innocent, because it insults my intelligence. It makes me very angry.
Yet we retain that romantic image of him as the tragic hero, forced down this path by a world that's immoral.
We was all proud of you, being a hero and all. Your father too.
Most masterfully, the story gets us to root for his evil choices themselves, as we're made to feel that people who betray or wrong him deserve punishment for not living up to his sense of honor.
I know it was you, Fredo. You broke my heart. You broke my heart.
So it's not that we like him in spite of his villainy. We like that he unlocks a villainy in us that might feel quite good.
I don't feel I have to wipe everybody out, Tom. Just my enemies.
You can also make a case that some of the characters who defined the age of the TV anti-hero took us in with the same trickery technique and were actually sympathetic villains in anti-hero clothing.
I am not in danger, Skylar. I am the danger.
Like Michael, Tony Soprano starts out feeling like a slightly more optimistic spin on the mafioso. He loves his family, and despite the nature of his business, he seems to conduct it in a semi-decent way. He looks out for the other guys in his crew, seems to make rational and fair decisions.
15 grand is too much. I'll talk to Uncle Junior personally, and maybe I can get it to around 10.
And strikes both his coworkers and us as strong leadership material.
More is lost by indecision than a wrong decision.
These facts let us justify how much we might like or enjoy watching Tony, even while we watch him do blatantly horrible things. But over time, he leads everyone in his life to misery, if not death. And his therapist, Dr. Melfi, concludes that he's a sociopath.
Apparently, the talking cure actually helps them become better criminals.
So the gradual yet shocking reveal of that show is that we, like Melfi, have been suckered into making excuses for the fact that he was a straight-up villain all along. Game of Thrones followed this trickery path in an extreme way by turning its inspirational heroine Daenerys Targaryen into a villain in the final season, but many fans found her shift too sudden and drastic.
Children, little children burned!
I tried to make peace with Cersei. She used their innocence as a weapon against me.
So that reaction shows that it's important to include viewers in the character's transformation, letting us understand and participate in why the character's villainy gets expressed. And this leads to our fourth technique. Give us an ideological or mission-driven sympathetic villain who's motivated by a beautiful-sounding idea.
May her arrow signify the end of tyranny and the beginning of a new era.
This villain probably thinks they're a good guy.
Your planet was on the brink of collapse.
Or at least they started out that way.
I will answer injustice with justice.
But ultimately, the takeaway is usually that pursuing an abstract greater good isn't worth it if you have to act like a villain to succeed.
You created a world without murder. And all you had to do is kill someone to do it.
Stories about the sympathetic villain are a warning. Setting out with good intentions isn't enough, and it's easier than you think to end up on the wrong side. A key reason the villain exists in the story is to challenge the hero philosophically, to express a mindset or counter-argument that the hero must confront and defeat.
There is no good and evil. There is only power. And those too weak to seek it.
So making your villain compelling is a powerful way to make their counter-argument stronger.
Greed, for lack of a better word, is good.
Forcing us to really consider this ideological challenge so that the hero's ultimate moral victory means more.
As much as I wanted to be Gordon Gekko, I'll always be Bud Fox.
At its best, the sympathetic villain story can be deeply effective at articulating a wider critique of society. From The Godfather to Goodfellas to The Sopranos, sympathetic mafia villains yield a scathing critique of the American dream and how it uses the romance of family as a smokescreen for a ruthless, selfish capitalism.
It's not personal, Sonny. It's strictly business.
It's business. We're soldiers. We follow codes.
Does that justify everything that you do?
On the other hand, it's easy for the message of a sympathetic villain story to get messy, especially if it's unclear which character and which philosophy we're meant to root for. Some stories try to solve this by pitting the sympathetic villain protagonist against an even worse villain.
For all your noise and bluster, you're just a silly little girl with no one around to protect her.
Other stories make the villain's case stronger by cutting down the hero figure. Billions introduces its central shady hedge fund manager Bobby Axelrod as a rags-to-riches underdog.
I carried your grandfather's bag quite a few times. Your bag too, Chad, in the summer after middle school.
While his supposed good guy antagonist, U.S. Attorney Chuck Rhodes, is portrayed as a child of privilege who's just as unscrupulous and determined to win by any means necessary.
I am willing to stare into the abyss beyond conventional morality and do what needs to be done.
But making the villain too likable or the hero too unlikable can obscure what the intended takeaway should be.
What have I done wrong, really? Except make money, succeed. All these rules and regulations, arbitrary.
Director Akira Kurosawa wrote that in his film Drunken Angel, the innate and powerful personal qualities of the actor playing the villain, Toshiro Mifune, were actually a problem because the theme of the film became somewhat indistinct. Arguably, Black Panther risked falling into this trap with charismatic villain Eric Killmonger, since a number of viewers left thinking he was right. Though in that case, it seems intentional that Killmonger's worldview is not written off.
When black folks started revolutions, they never had the firepower or the resources to fight their oppressors. Where was Wakanda?
The Dark Knight walks this line due to the charisma of Heath Ledger's Joker, but the movie takes pains to disprove the Joker's philosophy that only social norms hold us back from doing evil.
This city just showed you that it's full of people ready to believe in good.
2019's Joker gives the same character's mindset more validity by making him the protagonist and casting a damning light on Bruce Wayne's unfair privilege.
You have a problem with Thomas Wayne, too.
Yes, I do.
Yet by reframing this story so drastically that the hero is held in contempt and the villain has good reasons, does the film risk implicitly endorsing the villain's actions?
What do you get?
I don't think so.
When you cross a mentally ill loner with a
it.
society that abandons him and treats him like trash, get what you deserve!
Since the villain's philosophy is such a key part of why they exist, when a story centers or emphasizes a villain, it's especially important to be attentive to how they relate to wider cultural cues.
The US Army circulated an internal memo based on an FBI warning citing potential incel violence at an unnamed theater during opening weekend. I Care a Lot incorporates feminist rhetoric and a gay love story into its portrait of heartless guardian Marla Grayson, who preys on elders to make money.
You're my guardian robber.
But this arguably ends up making the film feel both misogynistic and homophobic. After first priming us to expect a moral about America's healthcare and legal systems,
I'm helping you feed the money monster, but I hardly see any of the gold for myself. Give me a taste.
It confusingly sets up her fight with her antagonist, Peter Dinklage's inept Russian mafia boss, as vaguely feminist.
You can't convince a woman to do what you want, and you call her a bitch and threaten to kill her.
And it then further confuses its message by giving us reasons to sympathize with the various angry men who attack her.
Hey, bitch!
Since she's preyed on their mothers.
She has a loving son to take care of her, and I just don't understand how the court can entrust my mother to this stranger.
By contrast, Gone Girl's use of an angry woman villain protagonist, also played by Rosamund Pike, works because the movie's central theme is how men stoke female rage.
He became someone I did not agree to marry, and found himself a newer, younger, bouncier, cool girl.
Like I Care a Lot, The One risks sending a weird message about gender politics, as it also stars an evil girl boss villain protagonist who gets attacked by and hurts disgruntled men while spouting feminist rhetoric.
You want power and success?
Yeah. I'm supposed to apologize for that. Men never do.
But like Gone Girl, it does a better job of using its villain's behavior to express a clear theme. CEO Rebecca sells a fairy tale of romance of finding your perfect chemical match, but she falters because she doesn't know the real meaning of love.
You didn't care about him. Just thought of yourself, you always do.
While it's helpful to put us in the villain's place and include us in their feelings, the sympathetic villain story is often best served by avoiding any mixed messages that this person might be right, or someone we'd want to emulate. This line in The One,
You think you're a bad person, but you're not.
is intentionally followed by a flashback confirming that nope, she definitely is a bad person, and if we had any doubt, the season ends playing a cover of Friend of the Devil.
Friend of the devil is a friend of mine.
Throughout cinema, some of the most successful stories with villain protagonists work because they don't bother to make this person traditionally likable.
I like to dissect girls. Did you know I'm utterly insane?
Whereas Joker's Arthur Fleck is positioned like an underdog to root for, one of the film's inspirations, Taxi Driver, takes pains to make us uncomfortable with protagonist Travis Bickle's repulsive views.
He should clean up this city here, because this city here is like an open sewer, you know? It's full of filth and scum.
Films like American Psycho and A Clockwork Orange use somewhat terrifying villain protagonists to put an idea under a lens.
I have all the characteristics of a human being, but not a single clear, identifiable emotion, except for greed and disgust.
The age of the anti-hero was grounded in a desire to understand what creates these people. Yet this new age of the sympathetic villain is more about understanding the structures that enable bad people. And there's actually optimism in this trend. It shows we're willing to look honestly at villains on screen and off, to hold ourselves and our society accountable, instead of making anti-heroic excuses. The sympathetic villain story makes us identify with a devil in order to confront the demons within, and just might offer us a useful exorcism.
My pain is constant and sharp, and I do not hope for a better world for anyone. In fact, I want my pain to be inflicted on others.
This is The Take on your favorite movies, shows, and culture.
Thank you so much for watching and for supporting us.
Please subscribe and never miss a take.